Hi guys, welcome back to Spirit and Truth. I'm Cassandra.
And I'm Destiny, and we will be reading Exodus 14:10 through 29. I have NIV, so feel free to follow along. If not, go ahead and just read yours, and then you can pause this video and come back. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Did we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Israelites? It would have been better for us to serve the Israelites than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you'll never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need to only be still." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch your hand out to the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry land. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and they will gain the glory through Pharaoh and his army, through their chariots and horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through the Pharaoh, his chariots, and horsemen." Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of the cloud was also removed in the front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, they could bring darkness to one side and light to the other. So neither went near them all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and on that night, the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned to dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with all the water on their right and on their left. The Israelites pursued them, and the Pharaoh's horses, the chariots, and the horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked up from the pillar of the fire and the cloud at the Egyptians' army and threw into confusion. He jammed the wheels of the chariots so that they had difficulty driving. And then the Egyptians said, "Let us get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." So the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Israelites, their chariots, and horsemen." Moses stretched his hand over the sea, and daybreak the sea went back into its place. The Egyptians were fleeing towards it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed Israel into the sea. Not one of them had survived. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with water on the right and the left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. Israel saw Egyptians lying dead at the shore, and then and then the Israelites saw the mighty land that the Lord displayed against the Egyptians. The people had feared the Lord, and they put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Wow,
That was good.
that was so good.
And now, if you guys have your own Bible, you can go ahead and take a break and read the scripture yourself and see what you got out of it and what questions you have, and then come back to this video. 11, it says, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? And why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said to leave us alone and let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness." And I could not believe that they actually said, "Oh, to leave us alone." Because, like, when you go back into it here, there's so much proof that God is alive. Like, he sends so many reasons to prove that he's real. And, like, for them to be like, "Oh, like, we didn't want to leave," is to be like, "Oh, yeah, like, I don't even care what God's doing for me."
Yeah.
Like, it was so dismissive.
Yeah, they're literally biting the hand that's feeding them.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, that's a good word for it. They are being very dismissive. I was actually looking at that one too because it just shows how little faith they ran on. It was like, I sometimes feel like when we're doing things like in real life, in real time, it's like if you're doing things for yourself, in a sense, you're not going to have much trust, much faith, you know. Because a lot of times, like, you set a line, you don't follow through, you lose trust in yourself. It's like little things like that are happening, but obviously this is much bigger because God is leading the way. And so when you're putting your trust in God, understand that He will come through if He's asking something this big of you. But because the Israelites were running from Egypt and they were doing it for themselves and not understanding that Moses was running through God, like this is all because Moses had put his trust in God, that they had lost faith, which is really so bizarre. Because then, I mean, later on, when God literally allows Moses splits the water. And I feel like, okay, that's really quick. Another topic that we can talk about, because not only did Moses split the sea, we're talking about like the sea, okay? They're walking on dry ground.
Yeah.
Dry ground.
I know, I looked at that too. I highlighted it.
Excuse me, dry ground. Like, he literally, God was like, no, like, I'm going to work through you right now and watch me work. Boom. Parts the sea, makes the ground dry. There's like no like muss, no fuss. Like he literally was like, no, stand on faith. Stand firm is literally what he says. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance of the Lord. He will bring you today, right now, real time. He's like, look, like I didn't do all this for like a giggle. I didn't do all this to bring you to your graves. No, you're right. I could have just left you in Egypt and like good luck for those men that followed us and ended up passing away. Like, no, I did this because God asked me to.
Right. That's good. Yeah, and that also shows like that no weapon formed against you will prosper. Not that the sea was technically against them, but it was the thing that was stopping them. And that's what led them to lose faith, because they're like, where are we gonna go?
Yeah, exactly.
But like the weapons that are formed against you can be the things that actually saves you, right, later on. So that was super cool too.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. That's a good point.
And to go with that, we can also talk about like in 17 it says, and I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians. It's like maybe a harder truth to like accept, right? But sometimes you pray for your enemies, right? And your hope is that their hearts will change.
Yep.
But if their hearts are not to change, then something might come to stop them. You want to expand on that better?
Yeah, so essentially, no, that's a really good point. So at the end of the day, like our job is to have the love like Jesus did, right? So like love thy neighbor, pray for your enemies. I feel like this is such a good one, because that really takes not only just like a willpower, but security, right? And we're putting our foundation, our faith, our trust into God, and it's like, listen, I'm praying that they will change their minds and they will come to and follow you. But if they're not, one thing you're not going to do is get in God's path, because again, we're not on this path for us, we're on this path for God.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get in God's path. So if God's got to make sure that, hey, listen, like this won't happen, this won't prosper, because like the reality is, like the Israelites have a foundation of hate, envy, like distrust. God's not going to let any of that come near him. So if Moses is that vessel that's allowing these people to get out, and that was God's purpose, then that's going to happen. Another one I like that is 15, and it says, the Lord says to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. And like I feel like in this it's like the same thing. Like Moses, like even after all of this that's going on, Moses is still like, God, what's going on? I don't know. Like help me. And God's like, dude, I'm showing you time and time again, I will be there for you. You have the power because I've invested that in you. Like you are my vessel right now. Like take that and like stand firm on that. Like he actually told the people earlier.
Yeah, people needed to see his confidence, because like if Moses kept crying out to God and was like, oh God, like change it for me, then nothing would have happened. It took Moses like raising his staff and pointing it at the sea and being like, I trust you, God, do your thing. You know, it took his action in order for there to actually be something. You can also talk about, and I kind of wish I mentioned this before when we were talking about the splitting the seas and how the Egyptians run after him. Like, imagine, okay, the sea splits, right? Imagine being the Israelites. You're like, okay, now we got a path, right? But like they're like running, right? They're like running, and the Egyptians are behind them, and they're getting to the end of the sea, and they're like, oh no, like what are we gonna do? Run our whole lives?
Yeah.
Because what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until they got to the end of the sea, all of them, that they washed everyone away, right? The Egyptians.
Yeah.
But it also is to say, like, if he did it right when all the Israelites entered and then right when the Egyptians entered, then some of the Egyptians probably could have got out on the other side
Yeah.
if he like didn't do it at the end, you know?
Mm-hmm.
They were stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes like your enemies or the things that are coming against you, like might have to stay around longer. And it's just like you said, like you can't
I see what
have
you're saying.
like this vision of like, oh, like all this bad is around me and it keeps happening and it's still attacking me, because sometimes it might take a longer time for God to actually do what he's intending.
I feel like yes, in some situations it's like a lot of things are happening and you feel like wow, like it's really heavy and you don't really know like is this going to end, right? Like I'm only one person, I can only take so much. But in those times, not only is God testing you to see if like you're going to be faithful to him, but he's also testing you to see like what are you made of. And like sometimes I'm going through like a really tough time, I ask myself like I'm praying and meditating, I'm in my word, I'm journaling, whatever it is that I'm doing. And it's like sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if this is enough. Well, the reality is like, good, you don't have to be enough. Like you personally do not have to be everything. That is what he's relying on you to come to him for. Um, so yeah. In those tough times it might seem like your enemies are like on one and they're like they may be winning in a sense, but the reality is no. They're actually 15 steps behind you because God's leading the path. What does your 21 say?
21. It says, then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up the path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land.
I feel like there's something there. Like when I look at 21, I kind of see like, okay, God who created everything could have in a millisecond just split it and it would have been that. But because he's using a human vessel to then split the actual sea, it took all night. And the Lord drove back using not only Moses, but using the winds to help and aid Moses. And I feel like in that point, too, it's like the same kind of topic, I think, right? It's like,
Yeah.
wow, this is taking a long time, all night to go ahead and like get this done and get this through because again, like they're running from an enemy right now. And it takes this long, and I feel like at this point too, we have to stay steadfast. Um we have to stay faithful to God and understand that like sometimes yeah, it's going to take a while, but the end goal and the accomplishment is going to be worth every single like um, moment of like distress in a sense.
Yeah, another point is 14:11. When the Israelites were like, why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? And they keep saying that they wanted to go back to Egypt, that they never wanted to leave Egypt. But it's not because it's actually what they liked. It was because it that they knew what their day to day was and that they were like comfortable there.
Yep, comfortable, convenience.
Yeah,
What was the other word? Complacency.
yeah,
Um, which really just leads us back to us as humans, and I feel like I struggle with this a lot. Um, not anymore, but I used to struggle with complacency. I just realized that like not only do we wake up and just it's such an honor to like be given another day, but we wake up and we're here for the Lord. Like whatever good we can do today is better than being stuck in a place that number one you're not wanted, number two you people don't care about
they don't care.
you. You
Yeah.
know, um,
And another thing was like, if you're comfortable where you're at and you want to get to this next level, there's probably it's gonna take time. It
yeah,
might not happen overnight. And in this case, like I you can look back at like 3:17, and it says that God actually led them the roundabout way through the wilderness towards the Red Sea. So sometimes it might not be the fastest route to get to where you're going, but I think especially spiritually, it's to build your faith. But I think it's also to realize like if it was social media, right, and you just woke up one day and then you're famous, right?
yeah,
Like you're not gonna value it.
yeah.
So I think sometimes if you have to go through a journey to get where you're going, like you're gonna have so much joy once you get there.
Yeah, and I feel like to add on to that point too is that a lot of this is to make you uncomfortable. To be in those places and you're in those relationships or you're in those friendships or at work, whatever the case is, and you want better, God is going to make you very uncomfortable, very displeased.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my goodness, things were going so good. No, actually, there's so much better waiting for you. So sometimes you are going to go through a desert and it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to feel miserable. But the reality is, He saved your life,
Yeah.
right? He brought you to a place where now you are free. You are much better off.
Yeah, because if you went back to like your version of Egypt, like where would your life be now? It'd be in shambles.
Exactly.
Like if you left a relationship or you left a job and you went back to it, if they didn't value you before and now they don't value you and they're gossiping about you, like it's
Yeah.
gonna be so much worse to go back to the places that
You
you're
don't
not welcomed
belong.
in. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Let us know if you have any comments, questions, please.
Okay. I can tell.